Um, right, can we all hear me? Do we need to do a sound check? Great. I've been asked to introduce myself to the camera first. So hello, camera. Hello, people on the internet watching. My name is Joe. I'm the warden here at Broughton. And you're stuck with me this morning, I'm afraid. So, this morning we're going to be looking at Moses and the journey of the Israelites from slavery to freedom. So have you ever faced a hopeless situation? Perhaps you're going through one right now. Perhaps it's the idea of having to listen to me speaking. We're going to look this morning at a group of people in a pretty hopeless situation and see how God brings hope in. Our story starts in Egypt. The Israelites have been living there since the time of Joseph. And in that time they have, according to Exodus chapter 1 verse 7, been exceedingly fruitful. They multiplied greatly, increased in numbers, and became so numerous that the land was filled with them. So things are going good. But then something changes. In verse 8, we see that a new king came to power in Egypt. And look, he said to his people, the Israelites have become far too numerous for us. Come, we must deal with them shrewdly, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country. So they put slave masters over them to oppress them with forced labour. And then in verse 12, we see that the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with harsh labour in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their harsh labour, the Egyptians worked them ruthlessly. Have you ever noticed how something that brings joy or is a great blessing or comfort can, over time, become a burden in itself? Anna and I once bought a laptop which felt like a blessing at the time, and it facilitated what we needed it to do. However, after a depressingly short time, it became incredibly slow. Slow to the point where it took over an hour just to log in. It ended up being a burden. But that doesn't necessarily nullify the good that it helped us to accomplish in the first place. When I first moved to this area, I was so thankful for the job that God had provided me. I learned a huge amount there, and I stayed for a fairly long time. However, towards the end, various circumstances changed. The day-to-day work I was doing changed, my team got shuffled around, and the culture began to change. I'm still incredibly grateful to God for my time there, but equally, I knew that it was time to go. And God was good and opened the doors for me to go elsewhere. It's similar here. The fact that the Israelites ended up oppressed should not discount the blessings that God brought upon them during the time of Joseph. But sadly, oppressed they were. And then in verse 22, it gets even worse, as Pharaoh gave this order to this people. Every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. And in the midst of all of this, a baby boy called Moses is born. On paper, Moses appears to be incredibly lucky. Firstly, his mother is able to keep him hidden for 3 months. 3 months. If any of you know my kids, then you'll know it's incredibly difficult to keep them hidden for 3 minutes, let alone 3 months. Secondly, she put the baby in a basket on the River Nile, with his sister watching to see what would happen. Would he be lost to hunger? Would he fall in? Would a crocodile get him? Would he simply be found and killed anyway? The odds of survival are low. Thirdly, he is found by Pharaoh's daughter, who, rather than having him taken to the authorities to be killed, feels sorry for him and caring for him. And she ends up paying Moses' mother to be his nurse. Of course, we know there's no such thing as luck. What we see here is God amongst a hopeless situation, bringing hope and deliverance, a theme that will continue through the whole of Moses' life. The story then picks up around 40 years later, with Moses having grown up. We have very little to go on for those 40 years, other than in Hebrews 11, verse 24, which says that by faith Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the fleeting pleasures of sin. Then back in chapter 2, verse 11 of Exodus, we see that he went out to where his own people were and watched them at their hard labour. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and that and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day, he went out and saw 2 Hebrews fighting, and he asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian. I'm encouraged by this, not because I've murdered anyone or have some intent to do harm to an Egyptian, but because I can empathise where Moses is in his walk with God. We see here a young Moses, filled with a strong identity and a sense of purpose. He sees himself as an Israelite, not an Egyptian. And he sees that his people are suffering. And he has a desire for them to be freed. And again, we see a foreshadowing of the great things yet to come, of Moses trying to free an Israelite from oppression. The difference between this time and what happens later, he's yet to properly encounter God. The reason I find this encouraging is because, particularly as a younger Christian, I also found myself with a lot of passion for God and doing his work. However, without much of a useful foundation in Christianity and without a stronger relationship with God, I often found that my efforts were lacking in momentum and effectiveness. I'm really grateful to God that if it can take Moses more than 40 years to become ready, then I still have time to grow in my own faith. Now Moses stays in Midian a long time, and whilst he's there, the people of Israel hit rock bottom. In verse 23, we read that during that long period, the king of Egypt died. The Israelites groaned in their slavery and cried out. And their cry for help, because of their slavery, went up to God. Do you ever just feel completely worn down? Completely stuck in a hopeless situation? Do you just feel this continuous grind? Lord, why this? Lord, why them? Lord, why us? Lord, why? I've had times when I felt so worn down by life that I've just had to pray, Lord, I can't even find the words, but you know what's going on. Hopelessness. Even now, I see things happening within myself, my family, my friends, my country, and even my world. I hate watching the news. Lord, why? Can there be any hope? The passage continues. God heard their groaning. Please, if you remember one thing from this talk, remember this. God hears our prayers. His Holy Spirit is always with us. And where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is freedom. There is hope. God will always bring you hope. God heard their groaning, and he remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. It's worth noting here that the phrase he remembered doesn't mean that God just forgot his covenant with Abraham. It means he's getting ready to act. Now, who hates waiting? I do. I am incredibly impatient. And I find the whole concept of waiting on God's time frustrating. Presumably, this is because I am a millennial, and most of what I want can just be downloaded within a few minutes. However, I've learned that over time, that patience and waiting are very important disciplines to practice. It is important for us to keep crying out to God. Keep praying and not lose hope during times of apparent inaction. You never know what God has in store around the corner, for others or for you. So now we come to the crux of things, not only for Israel and for Moses, but for us as well, an encounter with God. In Exodus chapter 3 now, Moses sees a bush that is on fire, but not burning up. Intrigued, he goes over to look, and God calls out to him from a bush. In verse 6, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. Let's note here, by the way, how Moses doesn't seem very filled with hope at this point. In fact, he's turned away in fear. Things don't get much better in the next few verses either. As God explains that he's heard his people cry out and that he is sending Moses to rescue them. Moses wants out. Who am I that I should go? Who should I say sent me? And then in chapter 4, what if they don't listen to me or believe me? I'm slow of speech and tongue. With each of these, God patiently encourages Moses and deals with his concerns. And the result? Please send someone else. Does that sound familiar to you? You want me to do what, God? You want me to give away money? You want me to be kind to that guy? Great acts of faith don't normally happen overnight. They happen slowly, but surely. They happen by being faithful to God in the small and simple things and build from there. We need to be listening to God each step of the way along our journey of faith. Gracefully, God allows Moses' brother, Aaron, to help him, and they set off to Egypt. In my head, I'm imagining a montage with music building to a crescendo as Moses and Aaron throw open the doors of Pharaoh's throne room, approach Pharaoh and say, "This is what the Lord God of Israel says. Let my people go, so that they may hold a festival to me in the wilderness." And Pharaoh says, "Nope." In fact, not only does he say no, in verse 6 we hear that same day Pharaoh gave this order to the slave drivers and overseers in charge of the people: "You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw. But require them to make the same number of bricks as before. Don't reduce the quota. They are lazy. That is why they are crying out." Then, in verse 21, we hear what the Israelite overseers have to say to Moses about that. "May the Lord look on you and judge you. You have made us obnoxious to Pharaoh and his officials and have put a sword in their hand to kill us." The Israelites are fed up. They are almost a lost cause. They are out of hope. They are stuck. I think there is a parallel here between the lost people of Israel and some of the lost people in our lives who do not know Jesus. They are in a horrible place. They loathe the position that they are in, and yet are in no position to get themselves out. Have you ever tried to tell someone about Jesus and been met with a response that has just been completely disproportionate and blown up in your face? It can be really overwhelming and make you feel blindsided. I think this is how Moses must have felt here. However, this time, Moses has learned his lesson. In verse 22, we see that he goes and talks to God. He releases his frustrations on God. "Why, Lord? Why have you brought trouble on these people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to speak to Pharaoh in your name, he has brought trouble on these people, and you have not rescued them at all." Have you ever prayed a prayer along the lines of, "Lord, what was the point of that?" Remember the words of Romans 8:28. "We know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." Nothing you do for God ever goes to waste. Nothing you do for God ever goes to waste. And then God really gets to work with the plagues. Now, we don't have much to go on concerning how the Israelites felt during the time of the plagues. They certainly would have been aware of them, and they likely would have been impacted. What we do know is that by the time of the last plague, the plague on the firstborn, Moses summons all the elders of Israel, and they come. In fact, not only do they come, but they listen and obey. And in chapter 12, verse 27, the people bowed down and worshipped. Hope is restored. The plagues have actually done the Israelites some good. Slowly but surely, they have raised their hopes of deliverance. They have gone from despairing at the thought of trying to leave to joyfully preparing for it in the way that God has told them to. So what can we learn from this? There are three things I'd like to draw out. Firstly, Moses. When he first encounters God, he is weak and feeble and frightened. Even when God equips him, he's hesitant to proceed. Eventually, he goes, but it doesn't quite work out first time. He goes back to God, asking why. But God says to keep going. As Moses keeps following God's instructions, step by step, his faith grows. As his faith grows, his hope grows, and the miracles he performs in the name of the Lord become more and more amazing and powerful. Secondly, Israel. The Israelites are done here. They are disillusioned and hopeless when Moses first tries to release them from their slavery. Through Moses' increased faith and consistent following of God's instructions, they eventually have their hope restored. As faith builds, so does hope. Thirdly, us. Who are we in this story? And where are we in this story? Are we Moses? Are we filled with a sense of purpose without direction? Are we terrified and frightened about what we think God is asking us to do? Are we slowly stepping out in faith, trying to do as God says, but finding it a bit hit and miss? Are we yearning to be people who will go out and do mighty things for God? Or perhaps we're Israelites. Do we feel weighed down and in bondage? Are we feeling a bit disillusioned with God and church and life? Are we tentatively excited at the sight of what we see God doing around us? Or are we worshipping in awe at the things God has done? Do we have hope? Or is hope lost? Sometimes we, as members of the church, can also feel a bit hopeless. I've been a member of churches, not necessarily this one, where other members would feel exasperated at various different aspects of the church. The outreach isn't effective. The kids' work isn't good enough. The leaders haven't thought about communion, about chairs, about coffee, about X, Y, and Z. Leaders are doing their best. They're doing their best to follow God's instructions. And that's what we need to do too. Sometimes it involves acceptance. Sometimes, just like Israel, we need to wait patiently on the Lord to see what he does. And hey, sometimes God puts these things on our hearts and equips us to go and sort them out ourselves. We as church are all part of God's big family. If someone is doing their best to follow what God is telling them to do, how shall we respond? If they mess up, do we say, as the Israelites said to Moses, "May the Lord look on you and judge you"? I hope not. And what about on a personal level? Have we lost hope? No, I hope not. Our hope is in Jesus. Our hope is in the same God that brought Israel out of slavery. And through Jesus, we are able to have a personal relationship with this God. Isn't that amazing? Isn't it? Good? You're not asleep? Through difficult times, not just during pandemics, when things have seemed impossibly hopeless, I have known in my heart the goodness of God. Knowing him has kept me going. It's given me hope. Not just a hope for today, but for tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. Before I finish, I'd like to invite you to just close your eyes and reflect for a few moments. Do you have hope today? Are you facing something overwhelming? Do you feel stuck or trapped in an impossible position? Do you have a hope in Jesus? Are you confident in that hope? Do you know someone who needs hope? Are you aware of a hopeless situation? Let's all just take a moment to pray. Bring our feelings to God. Lord, thank you that you give us hope. Thank you that you are the one that lifts us out of the pit. Lord, we lift up our worries and concerns and hopes to you this morning. Please bless us and minister to us today. Thank you.